Well, the man that picked that up, this man, Maurice Strong. Maurice had become a bureaucrat at the United Nations, and in 1972 he had a conference in Stockholm on the environment, and his whole goal was one world government. And he used the impetus of that global warming scare at that Stockholm conference to start the initiative that set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So now we had the U.S. government and the United Nations both promoting climate change, and it all came from that Revell Seuss paper and the research that followed and the dollars that were now flowing. And man, it was underway big time. So the IPCC, it had scientists and bureaucrats and politicians from throughout the world. It had the World Wildlife Federation, the Sierra Club, all the environmentalists, and they all got together and they voted that global warming was for real. Well, I got to tell you something. You don't settle science by a vote. It's not a political issue. It's not a vote. It's science. But never mind. They put out their reports, and they spent a lot of time telling us how we were destroying planet Earth. And they had fancy meetings in tropical locations throughout the world. And the scientists who supported global warming got the paid vacation trips to these big meetings and got to write these books and have their names and their careers. And man, it was a big deal. And what did Al Gore do? Well, he wrote a second book about global warming called An Inconvenient Truth. And we all know what became of that. His liberal friends in Hollywood turned that into a documentary, a sci-fi documentary, I might add, all about global warming. And they voted themselves a Oscar, Best Documentary Film of the Year in 2007. And then they turned around and Al Gore stood behind the IPCC president and they got the Nobel Peace Prize, all for scaring us about global warming. Well, what happened with this man, Roger Revell, who had started it all, the great scientist? Well, he had kind of lost interest in this population study center at Harvard and missed San Diego, I guess, and the beautiful Southern California climate. And he swallowed hard for his defeat there, and he came back to the University of California, San Diego as a professor. And there he wrote these letters, and I want you to look at them. The first one goes from his desk to U.S. Congressman Tim Wirth. Quote, "We should be careful not to arouse too much alarm about the rate and amount of warming before it comes clearer." And he wrote another letter here to Congressman Tim Bates. "Most scientists familiar with the subject are not yet willing to bet the climate this year is the result of greenhouse warming. As you very well know, climate is highly variable year to year. The causes of these variations are not at all well understood. My own personal belief is that we should wait another 10 to 20 years to really be convinced that the greenhouse is going to be important for human beings in both positive and negative ways." So there it was. The man who had started the global warming campaign had put up the flag of warning. Hey folks, this may not be for real. Caution, caution. Well, he even wrote an article that was published in a new science magazine called Cosmos. And he teamed with a professor, Fred Singer, to write that article. And that article was called What to Do About Greenhouse Warming, Look Before You Leap. And the article concluded, and I quote, "The scientific basis for a greenhouse warming is too uncertain to justify drastic action at this time." Wow. The man who had started it? Well, how did Al Gore react to that? Well, he said, "I've made up my mind. Revell is now senile. Pay no attention to that. The debate is over. And you've been hearing that now for 20 years. Al Gore won't debate anybody, and he claims it's for real." Well, we lost Roger Revell. The fight had to go on without him. He passed away of a heart attack in 1991. And after he died, his family joined with the people at Scripps to make him the father of global warming. They rejected his denialism. and so did the UN IPCC. But Dr. Singer, he was made to be the scapegoat for it all. They said he had caused it. Well, I finally was able to interview Dr. Singer about this controversy.
He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Dr. Singer, what was Roger Revell's view of carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas when you co-authored that Cosmos article back in 1990?
He was very relaxed about it. He basically looked at this as a grand geophysical experiment. After he and his collaborators like David Keeling found that CO2 was in fact increasing in the atmosphere, he and his colleagues were wondering if it would have any impact on climate. He wasn't about to make any judgment on the matter until the data were in. Of course, at that time, by 1990, we had about more than 10 years worth of satellite data, and the satellites didn't show any appreciable warming. And this is what actually set off my own thinking on the matter. I wondered what was going on. After all, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It's increasing. There's no question about that. Where is the warming? Well, it turns out that the atmosphere is much more complicated than the climate models believe, and the warming is offset probably by a kind of negative feedback that comes from clouds and water vapor in the atmosphere.
With Dr. Singer, now he's not the only scientist, please understand this, who questions this global warming frenzy, this climate change scare. In fact, there are 9,000 PhDs that have signed a petition denying that CO2 is causing global warming. There's 31,000 scientists in total who have signed that petition. There is a whole organization of them. A huge group from NASA recently wrote to the United Nations and to the U.S. Congress saying, please stop the global warming scare. There is a strong movement opposed to global warming. You don't hear about it in the media because, you know, the media has that Al Gore liberal bias, so it becomes very tough. And at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, Al Gore was a hero, and they proved it. They gave him the first Roger Revell Award.
Al Gore says he was deeply moved by Revell's early work. He, now considered at the forefront of the global warming movement, a Nobel Peace Prize winner and Oscar-winning documentarian, all from his work on the environment. Now he adds a new distinguished and personal honor to that list.
I am deeply, deeply grateful.
And tonight's celebration was part of 3 days of celebrating the life of Roger Revell. Roger Revell would have been 100 years old tomorrow. We are live in La Jolla. I'm Tom Jordan, KUSI News.
Thanks, Tom. John Coleman believes there is no significant man-made global warming, and he travels the nation speaking on the topic.
John has some insights now on Roger Revell's scientific research and the effect that it had on Al Gore. John?
Well, Revell was a powerful man, a noteworthy scientist, and a significant force here in San Diego in the 1950s. There's no doubt that he's largely responsible for the high status of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in its field, and for locating the University of California of San Diego, UCSD, at La Jolla. While serving as director of Scripps, Revell and one of his researchers wrote the first modern scientific paper that linked carbon dioxide released in the air from the burning of fossil fuels and the greenhouse effect and the warming of temperatures. Well, this triggered an avalanche of research that eventually became the impetus behind the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the entire global warming movement. In the 1960s, Revell moved to Harvard to establish a Center for Population Studies. This is where Professor Revell encountered student Albert Gore. He involved Gore and his classmates in the tabulating of data from a carbon dioxide study. Gore was so impressed, he wrote about it in his 1992 book, Earth in the Balance. That became the story for the movie An Inconvenient Truth, the Oscar, and the Nobel Peace Prize, and some people say $100 million all came from that. There is no doubt Roger Revell had a major impact on Vice President Gore's life. But there's a twist. In 1988, Roger Revelle was having second thoughts about whether carbon dioxide was a significant greenhouse gas. He wrote letters to 2 congressmen about it. And in 1991, he co-authored a report for the new science magazine Cosmos, in which he expressed his strong doubts about global warming and urged more research before any remedial action was taken. At that point, Mr. Gore pronounced Revelle senile and refused to debate global warming. He continues to refuse to debate. Many offers of thousands of dollars have been made for debate. He refuses. Today, Gore sequestered the media at this event, and he set forth rules: no questions, no interviews. I have learned that in 1991, Roger Revelle made what was his final speech at the high-powered, very private summer enclave of powerful men and politicians at the Bohemian Grove in Northern California. There, he apologized for his research, for sending so many people in the wrong direction on global warming, and he worried about the political fallout from the UN IPCC and Al Gore. A man named Don Michael Schmedman, who lives in the San Francisco area, was there that day, and he remembers the Revelle speech very well. He has told me about it in some detail. So think of the irony. Today, Al Gore received the first Roger Revelle Award, honoring the man who sent him on his global warming campaign. But Revelle had realized that it was a false alarm and that the science was flawed before he died. Revelle died of a heart attack in 1991. It would be interesting to know that if he had lived, would he be approving of the award that was given tonight? Or perhaps would he be joining me at the International Conference of Global Warming Skeptics in New York next week? If you want to read the article on global warming that I have written, you can go to KUSI.com, click on Coleman's Corner.
John, this is really interesting. We haven't heard this information at all before.
Well, I've done a lot of digging over the last year to find all of this, and it really fascinated me when I stumbled across the Bohemian Grove speech. It's not documented anywhere.
This is the first time your orbits have crossed, you and Al Gore. You're both in the same city for 24 hours, and we couldn't get the two of you to meet.
Well, no, Mr. Gore, of course, is former vice president. He's a man who got 52 million votes for president, served very honorably as a politician. I think he would have little regard for me.
But you'd like to debate him, wouldn't you?
Well, sure, I'd love to debate him, but you understand, this isn't political. I'm a journalist and a meteorologist. My interest is strictly in the science.
Thank you, John.
So that's the report. And I'm sure you're wondering, why haven't I heard all of this before? Why isn't the media full of it? Why do I keep hearing about global warming and its threat to our civilization? Well, it's $4.7 billion a year of our tax money, and that's the power of money. Now, everything I've had in this report is posted, including the complete interview with Dr. Singer. You only saw part of that interview. That complete interview and a lot of other material is posted on my Coleman's Corner website at KUSI.com, Coleman's Corner. Now, I would be delighted to have you look there. I'm also a regular reader of a site called What's Up With That, where my friend Anthony Watts hosts any number of skeptical papers on global warming. The research flows there on a daily basis. Now, what's going to defeat this global warming scare? I don't think it's like David and Goliath. I don't think we can defeat $4.7 billion, the Democrat Party, the United Nations, and the Sierra Club and the Wildlife Federation and all of them. They just claim that we're deniers and old goats, and they think we're bought and paid for by the big oil companies, which we are not. Don't have anything to do with them. But I don't think we can defeat them. You know what's going to defeat them? Time. A few more bitterly cold winters, a turn toward a colder climate. When the global warming fails to materialize in time, people will begin to believe. And I have noted that a recent Gallup poll shows that more and more people are saying global warming, that's not the big deal. We got a lot of big deals going on, employment, jobs, government too big, that sort of thing. The list of their concerns is very interesting.